Most welcome, dear listeners. Today we will dive into the deep waters of an era where love was a luxury rarely permitted, where noble hearts faced destinies traced by others. This is the story of two souls who found in adversity the strength to rewrite their own destiny. In 1881, in the frozen mists of French aristocracy, a young woman will be delivered as payment for a debt, but will discover that even in the coldest marriages, the most ardent loves can bloom. A story of overcoming dignity and the silent transformation that only true love can operate. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching us from? Your presence here makes this journey even more special. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. This helps us continue bringing these moving stories to you. October 1881, Loire Valley, France. Château de Montclair. The carriage cut through the dense fog like a blade through grey silk. Charlotte Beaumont watched through the fogged window, the spectral silhouettes of the poplars that bordered the road, her gloved fingers tracing nervous circles on the navy blue fabric of her travelling dress. The air smelled of wet earth and decomposing leaves, the melancholic perfume of French autumn. At 21, she carried on her shoulders the weight of a debt that was not hers. Her father's lost bets at Parisian gaming tables had sealed her destiny as currency of exchange. An arranged marriage with a stranger, Count Edouard de Montclair, widowed and, according to whispers, crippled by an accident. The chateau emerged from the mists like a sleeping giant. Norman towers of limestone rose against the leaden sky, crowned by dark slates that gleamed wet under the persistent drizzle. High, narrow windows watched the arrival like tired eyes, and century-old ivy embraced the walls in an eternally green gesture against the coldness of stone. François, the veteran butler with face marked by war, received her in the inner courtyard. His trembling hands took the small trunk that contained all of Charlotte's worldly belongings, while Madame Dubois, housekeeper with severe expression and greying hair gathered in an impeccable chignon, led her through corridors adorned with dark tapestries that narrated medieval hunts. In the chateau's chapel, under the filtered light of Gothic-stained glass, the wedding proceeded in solemn silence. Père Antoine, parish priest with white beard and kind eyes, conducted the ceremony while aromas of dried lavender and incense created an ethereal atmosphere. Charlotte pronounced her vows looking at hands clasped over the missal, avoiding the gaze of the man beside her. Edouard de Montclair was younger than she had expected, 33 years only, but carried in his countenance a sadness that aged him. Wavy chestnut hair, grey eyes like the autumn sky, and an expression that spoke of recent sorrows. She noticed the polished wooden wheelchair beside him, silent witness to his condition. When the bells pealed announcing the union, Charlotte understood that her maiden life had ended. Now she was the Countess of Montclair, a stranger in strange land, married to a man she had known only in that moment. The first dinner was served in an immense dining room, where their voices echoed lost between walls covered with portraits of ancestors. But it would be in the abandoned workshop that Charlotte would discover the first secret that would change everything. The first weeks flowed slowly like thick honey. Charlotte wandered through the chateau corridors like a ghost in search of purpose, her steps echoing on the cold marble. Autumn deepened its golden colors in the gardens that framed the property, but within the walls, time seemed suspended in perpetual melancholy. Celeste, the head cook with rosy face and maternal smile, tried to brighten the dinners with delicacies that Charlotte barely touched. Jean-Baptiste, the head gardener, greeted her respectfully when she walked among the pruned rose bushes, but his gentle words were lost in the wind that carried dry leaves in melancholic swirls. Madame Dubois governed the house with military efficiency, and Charlotte soon discovered that the housekeeper's respectful coldness hid a fierce loyalty to the memory of the first countess. Isabel, the dead wife, still inhabited each room like an invisible presence, in the flower arrangements that Madame Dubois kept always fresh, in the silk curtains that no one dared change, in the jasmine perfume that persisted in some chambers. It was on an afternoon of dense fog that Charlotte discovered the workshop. Climbing a spiral staircase she had found by chance, she reached a high tower with north-facing windows. The oak door creaked as it opened, revealing a sanctuary preserved with religious care. Easels held unfinished canvases, soft landscapes where pastel colors mixed like sighs. Brushes rested still dirty with dried paint, and squeezed paint tubes guarded the last expressions of a creative soul. In the center of the room, on a special easel, an unfinished portrait. a woman with reddish hair like autumn flames and green eyes that seemed to smile even in the painting's incompleteness. Isabel. Charlotte extended her hand, almost touching the dried paint, when she heard the sound of wheelchair wheels on the wooden floor. She turned to find Edouard at the door's threshold, his face pale as marble and grey eyes clouded with pain that knew no comfort. "Forgive me, I didn't know." Charlotte stepped back, words dying in her throat. He didn't respond immediately. His fingers gripped the chair arms until his knuckles whitened, and Charlotte saw a single tear slide down his face before he turned the chair and departed without a word. That night, during the silent dinner, Charlotte observed her husband push food around his plate without appetite. The candles flickered between them, creating dancing shadows on the walls, and she understood that she had touched a wound that still bled. But it would be in the deep hours of dawn, when the chateau's silence became absolute, that a casual encounter in the library would plant the first seeds of an unexpected transformation. Insomnia had become Charlotte's constant companion. In the small hours of dawn, when even the servants rested, she wandered the corridors seeking something to calm the restlessness of her soul. Thus she discovered the library, a sanctuary of knowledge with shelves that rose to the vaulted ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes that exhaled the sweet and woody perfume of accumulated wisdom. The fireplace crackled softly, its embers projecting golden warmth that contrasted with the marble's cold. Charlotte chose a volume of Voltaire and settled into a burgundy velvet armchair, letting the words transport her away from the solitude that enveloped her. It was the almost imperceptible creaking of wheelchair wheels that alerted her to another insomniac's presence. Edouard emerged from the shadows, his expression revealing surprise at finding her there. "Forgive me, madam. I didn't expect to find anyone awake at this hour." His voice was softer than Charlotte remembered, laden with a melancholy that echoed her own. "Don't apologize. Insomnia makes us nocturnal neighbors." A respectful silence established itself between them. Edouard directed his chair toward a nearby table, where volumes of philosophy and diplomatic history lay open. Charlotte observed him discreetly, the precise movements of his hands turning pages, the serene concentration that softened the lines of pain in his face. "Schopenhauer?" she asked, noticing the volume he was handling. Edouard raised his eyes, surprised. "Do you know his work?" "My mother, before dying, she taught me that literature was a window to worlds where pain can be understood." Charlotte closed her own book. "He writes about the will to live despite suffering." Something changed in the Count's expression. The defensive rigidity faded slightly, replaced by genuine interest. "Your mother was a wise woman. Mine too." His voice failed momentarily. "Isabel painted because she believed beauty could exist even in sadness. It was the first moment when the first wife's name brought not only pain, but also gentle nostalgia." Charlotte felt a door crack open between them. Night after night, they met in the library. Conversations about books evolved toward discussions of philosophy, art, the diplomatic travels Edouard had made before the accident, Vienna with its melancholic waltzes, London wrapped in Thames mists, St. Petersburg gleaming under snow. He spoke of European politics with passion, and Charlotte shared her reflections on agriculture and administration that she had learned observing her father's properties. One night, when November rain drummed on the windows, Edouard told of the accident. The carriage that carried Isabel and her unborn child back from Paris, the sudden storm, the muddy roads. 2 months later, during an equestrian competition, his own accident, as if destiny demanded he pay for what he couldn't prevent. Charlotte, in turn, whispered about the tuberculosis that had taken her mother when she was 9, about the lonely years that followed, until being delivered as payment for paternal debts. But it was during winter's first snowfall that something changed irrevocably between them, when Charlotte found Edouard in a crisis of desperation that would reveal the true strength dwelling within her. December arrived with white fury that transformed the Loire Valley into a crystal landscape. Snow fell in thick flakes, covering the sleeping vineyards and silencing the world under its immaculate mantle. In the chateau, fireplaces roared constantly, creating islands of warmth against the cold that infiltrated through the centennial stones. Charlotte had found her purpose in the previous months. She had immersed herself in the property's administration books, discovering that Montclair's vineyards produced some of the region's best wines, but that antiquated techniques limited their excellence. With Jean-Baptiste's timid help, she had begun implementing methods she had read in modern agricultural treatises. She had also established a small school for rural workers' children, teaching them to read and write in a heated chateau room. The children adored her, and their laughter echoing through corridors brought life where before there were only melancholic echoes. But it was on a night when the snowfall intensified into a fierce storm that Charlotte discovered the depth of the wound Edouard carried. She was seeking him to show the rose garden restoration plans when she found him in Isabelle's former room, a chamber that had remained untouched since her death. Edouard was hunched over the chair, shoulders shaking with silent sobs, holding against his chest a silk shawl that still retained vestiges of jasmine perfume. "I should have gone with her," he murmured upon seeing her at the door. "Should have been in the carriage, then perhaps I could have protected her." Charlotte approached slowly, as if calming a wounded animal. She knelt before the chair, her hands covering his over the shawl. "Guilt is a prison we build ourselves," she whispered. "Your wife wouldn't want to see you imprisoned thus." Edouard's grey eyes met hers, clouded with unshed tears. "How can I free myself when I carry in my legs the constant reminder of what I lost?" "Your legs don't define who you are," Charlotte responded firmly. "They don't nullify your capacity to love, to create, to be loved." Her own tears began to fall. "I too was imprisoned, Edouard, trapped by circumstance, by lack of choice. But here beside you I learned that even in arranged marriages, true affections can grow." Wind howled outside, but in the room a different silence established itself. Edouard raised his hand and gently touched Charlotte's face, drying her tears. "Charlotte," he whispered, and for the first time her name sounded like a caress on his lips. "You brought light where there were only shadows." That night, while the storm shook the windows, they remained together, not as husband and wife by convenience, but as two souls who had found in each other the possibility of redemption. And it would be this discovery that would motivate them to seek something many believed impossible, the cure not only of the body's wounds, but also of the soul's scars. 14 months had passed since the night of mutual love confession. Spring of 1883 brought not only nature's rebirth, but also a hope Charlotte had not dared feed before. Dr. Friedrich Wagner, Viennese neurologist of international reputation, arrived at the chateau on a golden May morning, when the rose bushes Charlotte had patiently restored exploded in buds promising flowers. He was a tall, thin man, with greying beard and penetrating blue eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface of things. "Count de Montclair," he said in French laden with German accent, "your wife wrote to me about your condition. I would like to examine your legs." For 3 days, the doctor subjected Edouard to meticulous examinations. He tested reflexes, applied electrical stimuli, studied the exact extent of the spinal lesion. Charlotte remained always near, holding her husband's hand when the procedure's pain became intense. On the 4th day's afternoon, Dr. Wagner summoned them for a conversation in the main salon. Fire danced in the fireplace, and rose aroma entered through open windows, mixing with the beeswax perfume of antique furniture. "The lesion is not complete," announced the doctor, his words falling in silence like precious stones. "There is severe inflammation compressing the spinal cord, but no total rupture of nerve fibers." Charlotte felt the world spin. Edouard squeezed her hand until it hurt. "What does that mean?" he asked, voice barely controlled. "It means there is hope. An experimental treatment I've been developing. Hydrotherapy combined with specific exercises and controlled application of electrical currents to stimulate nerve regeneration." The doctor paused. "I cannot guarantee you will walk again, but there is a real possibility of significant improvement." Treatment began immediately. Dr. Wagner remained at the chateau for 6 months, supervising each session. Mornings were dedicated to therapeutic baths in a specially constructed bathtub, where Edouard remained immersed in waters of varying temperatures, while Charlotte massaged his legs with medicinal oils. Afternoons were reserved for electrotherapy, careful application of currents that made muscles contract involuntarily. It was painful and exhausting, but Edouard endured everything with fierce determination, fed by the love he saw in Charlotte's eyes. In the 5th month of treatment, on a luminous October morning, the miracle happened. Edouard was in the bathtub when he suddenly cried out, "Charlotte, I feel your hands." She looked where she massaged his right thigh and saw tears of joy descending his face. Sensation was returning. 15 months later, the sound of hesitant footsteps echoed through the chateau corridor, steps many swore never to hear again, but which would carry in their souls the weight of a love that had conquered the impossible. The orthopedic apparatus of leather and metal gleamed under the golden light of summer morning. Edouard advanced slowly through the chateau's main corridor, each step a victory conquered with sweat, tears, and unbreakable determination. The rhythmic sound of metal rods against marble had replaced the wheelchair's creaking, a symphony of hope that resonated through the centennial vaults. Charlotte walked beside him, 8 months pregnant, her hands resting on the rounded belly where new life grew. They had allowed themselves to dream of children only when Edouard's recovery had become incontestable reality. Now, 3 months after he had taken his first stumbling steps, she carried the fruit of a love that had blossomed against all expectations. "You need to rest," murmured Edouard, noticing how she leaned more heavily on his arm. "No more than you," Charlotte responded with a smile. "Our steps need to be coordinated now." Dr. Wagner had departed in spring, leaving precise instructions for treatment continuity. Edouard dedicated mornings to exercises that gradually strengthened his legs, and afternoons to administering the properties that flourished under their joint command. Montclair's vineyards had become famous in the region. Charlotte's agricultural innovations, combined with Edouard's diplomatic knowledge of European markets, created extraordinary synergy. Enologists from Paris came to consult their methods, and bottles with the Montclair seal began appearing on French aristocracy tables. The school for workers' children had grown and established itself permanently in a reformed chateau wing. Charlotte taught literature and mathematics, while Edouard shared knowledge of history and geography from his diplomatic travels. Children's laughter had become the property's daily soundtrack, replacing the melancholic silence that once reigned. On a luminous August morning, when the first labor pains began, Charlotte was in the rose garden gathering flowers for the week's arrangements. Celeste found her curved among the bushes, one hand resting on a centennial rosebush trunk, breathing deeply, while waves of pain coursed through her body. Labor lasted throughout the day. Dr. Beaumont, local physician, assisted Charlotte with Madame Dubois' help, whose initial coldness had transformed into maternal devotion toward the young countess. Edouard remained outside the door, supported by his special cane, counting each moan, each cry, each moment of silence that terrified him. When the baby's first cry echoed through the corridor, he knew his life had changed irrevocably once more. Marie-Claire de Montclair was born at the exact moment the sun set, as if nature had coordinated her arrival with the perfect ending of a golden day. But her presence would be only the beginning of even deeper transformations in the Montclair family. 6 years had painted Château de Montclair with colors of domestic happiness. Marie-Claire had grown like an animated porcelain doll, with golden curls that danced while she ran through gardens and grey eyes inherited from her father, but illuminated by perpetual curiosity. Her crystalline laughter echoed through transformed corridors, where smiling family portraits had replaced somber ancestral paintings. Edouard had progressed remarkably. The special cane, forged by a Parisian artisan in cherry wood with worked silver handle, had become his constant companion, allowing him to walk with only a slight limp. On good days, he even managed to do without it for short periods, especially when playing with Marie-Claire in the garden. The vineyards prospered beyond any expectation. The last harvest had been acclaimed by French critics as a masterpiece of modern viticulture, and orders arrived from London, Vienna, and even St. Petersburg. Charlotte had established a reputation as one of France's most innovative rural administrators, and her techniques were studied by landowners throughout the country. But it was during a routine medical consultation that the apparently cloudless sky of their lives revealed its first shadows. Dr. Moreau, physician who had succeeded Dr. Beaumont after his retirement, was a young man educated at the Sorbonne, with particular interest in blood diseases. During Charlotte's annual examination, he noticed a pallor that wasn't normal, a fatigue she attributed to motherhood's demands and property administration. "Countess, when was the last time you felt truly energized?" he asked, examining her lower eyelids with a magnifying glass. Charlotte laughed softly. "Doctor, I have a 6-year-old daughter, vineyards to supervise, a school to administer. Fatigue is my constant companion." But examinations revealed a darker truth. Iron levels in her blood were dangerously low. Severe anemia that, according to Dr. Moreau, had worrying hereditary characteristics. "It's progressive," he explained during a private meeting with the couple in Edouard's office. "And there's evidence it could become fatal during future pregnancies. The body simply couldn't support the additional demand." The silence that followed was loaded with unspoken meanings. Marie-Claire was only 6 years old, and they dreamed of more children. A house full of laughter, a numerous family that would complete the chateau's transformation. "Is there treatment?" Edward asked, his hand finding Charlotte's on the table. "Specific diet, iron supplements, adequate rest. It can control the condition, delay its progression, but—" the doctor hesitated. "If you decide to have more children, extreme medical care will be necessary. And even then." That night, while they watched Marie-Claire sleep in her small bed, the couple didn't know that the coming years would bring not only the family expansion they dreamed of, but also medical advances that would challenge all somber prognoses. 13 years had passed since Dr. Moreau's somber diagnosis. Marie-Claire had become a 19-year-old young woman, tall and elegant like a swan, with her mother's sharp intelligence and father's natural dignity. But she was not alone in the renovated chateau. Against all medical predictions, Charlotte had given birth to twins 4 years after Marie-Claire's birth. Marcel and Adeline arrived on a snowy February morning after a pregnancy carefully monitored by a special medical team summoned from Paris. Charlotte's condition had been controlled with absolute rest and rigorously supervised diet, but the birth had nearly cost her life. For years she had lived with progressive anemia's shadow looming over her head. Constant fatigue limited her activities, and Dr. Moreau came regularly from Paris to monitor her condition, which, despite care, continued deteriorating slowly. It was on a golden October morning in 1896 that hope arrived in the form of a letter with German stamp. Dr. Paul Ehrlich, disciple of old Dr. Wagner, wrote about a revolutionary treatment he had developed after years of blood disease research. Concentrated bovine liver extracts, rich in substances the human body seemed unable to produce adequately in certain hereditary conditions. "It's experimental," Dr. Ehrlich explained during his chateau visit. He was a small, intense man, with eyes that shone with discoverer's passion. "But preliminary results in patients with anemia similar to yours are extraordinary." Charlotte was willing to try anything. At 41, she felt as if living in constant fog of fatigue. Marie-Claire had assumed many of the property's administrative responsibilities, and Edouard had hired supervisors for the vineyards. The vitality that had always characterized Charlotte seemed to be fading like sand through fingers. Treatment began in November, daily injections of the extract for 6 weeks, followed by weekly maintenance doses. Dr. Ehrlich remained at the chateau throughout the period, meticulously documenting each change in Charlotte's condition. Improvement was gradual initially. In the 3rd week, she noticed she could climb stairs without becoming breathless. In the 5th week, she returned to walking through vineyards with Edouard, her steps firm for the first time in years. At treatment's end, transformation was evident to all. Brightness had returned to her eyes, pallor had given way to healthy flush, and her energy seemed renewed like a spring that had begun flowing again. "It's a miracle," whispered Edouard one night, while watching her dance with the children in the music room, where a new piano filled the air with cheerful melodies. But medicine's miracles were only the prelude to miracles the Montclair family would yet achieve, when grown children would become protagonists of their own extraordinary stories. The new century arrived at Château de Montclair like a symphony of possibilities. Charlotte, at 55, radiated vitality that defied both her age and medical history. Dr. Ehrlich's treatment had not only cured her anemia, but returned energy she hadn't experienced since youth. Edouard, at 67, remained active despite limitations that persisted since his accident 2 decades before. His cherry cane had become a symbol of elegance more than medical necessity, and he wielded it with natural authority of an aristocrat who had faced and conquered his adversities. Marie-Claire, now a 25-year-old young woman, had become one of the most admired women in French society. Her cosmopolitan education, supervised by Parisian tutors Charlotte had hired, and refined beauty attracted attention of Charles Pemberton, young English diplomat who had served in the British Embassy in Paris. The wedding was celebrated on a June morning when Charlotte's rose bushes were at their glory's peak. The Chateau Chapel, decorated with white roses and blue hydrangeas, witnessed the union between the Montclair's daughter and representative of a respected English diplomatic family. It would be an alliance that would open doors for commercial collaborations between France and England that would benefit Montclair vineyards for decades. Marcel, at 21, had inherited both Charlotte's passion for innovation and Edouard's diplomatic knowledge of international markets. He had studied viticulture in Bordeaux and enology in Burgundy, returning to the chateau with revolutionary ideas for expanding family business. Under his direction, Montclair vineyards began exporting to the New World. Their bottles crossed the Atlantic to adorn tables in New York and Buenos Aires. Adeline, the youngest at 21, had shocked French society by becoming the first woman accepted into the Sorbonne's medical course. Her iron determination much resembled Charlotte's, but channeled toward medical science that had saved her mother. She spoke with passion about anatomy and physiology during family dinners, scandalizing conservative guests, but filling her parents' hearts with pride. On Charlotte and Edward's 35th wedding anniversary, they held the greatest ball in chateau history. All regional aristocracy attended, along with diplomats, doctors, scholars, and artists who had become family friends over the years. Ballrooms, silent for so long, resonated with Viennese waltzes, while couples spun under crystal chandeliers that reflected 1,000 points of golden light. "Do you remember," whispered Edward in Charlotte's ear while they danced the opening waltz, "when we believed love was a luxury we couldn't afford?" Charlotte smiled, observing their children scattered throughout the salon. Marie-Claire conversing elegantly with ambassadors, Marcel explaining vinification techniques to interested businessmen, Adeline debating medicine with a University of Paris professor. "We discovered love wasn't a luxury," she replied. "It was the necessity that made all other luxuries possible." But even in moments of greatest happiness, time continued its implacable march, and the following years would bring both the coronation of love that had built Château de Montclair and the inevitable farewell that would test its true strength. The following years flowed like a serene river toward its natural destiny. Charlotte and Edward aged together with the dignity of two trees whose roots had intertwined so deeply they had become a single entity sustaining the same fertile soil. At 70, Charlotte maintained erect posture and bright eyes, though silver threads now adorned her chestnut hair. She dedicated her mornings to correspondence with Marie-Claire, who lived in London, but visited the chateau regularly with her own children, 3 little ones who ran through gardens as she herself had done decades before. Marcel had transformed the family business into a modest but respected empire. Montclair wines were served in French embassies around the world, and techniques he had developed were studied in viticulture schools throughout Europe. He had married a young woman from a Burgundian family, and together they administered not only the original properties, but new vineyards acquired in the region. Adeline, Dr. Adeline de Montclair, had established herself as one of Paris's first respected female physicians. She had specialized in feminine and infant medicine, treating poor mothers and children in a dispensary she herself had founded with part of the family inheritance. She remained single by choice, dedicating her life entirely to medicine and research. Edward, at 82, had finally retired his cherry cane in favor of a more comfortable wheelchair for long afternoons. But his mind remained sharp as ever, and he still received diplomats and scholars interested in his memories of previous centuries' European courts. On a golden September afternoon, while contemplating vineyards that extended to the horizon in waves of golden foliage, Charlotte noticed Edward seemed particularly thoughtful. "What are you thinking, my dear?" she asked, adjusting the blanket over his legs. "I think of how mysterious destiny is," he replied, taking her hand in his. "You came to me as payment of a debt, and I discovered that actually I was the one in debt. To life, to love, to the possibility of being happy again. That night, they fell asleep as they had for decades, side by side, hands intertwined, hearts beating in the same gentle rhythm. But the next morning only Charlotte awakened. Edward had departed during sleep, a serene smile on his lips, as if he had found in dreams the same peace he had found in real life. His hand still held Charlotte's, even in death maintaining the gesture that had sealed their love decades before. The funeral was a celebration of the extraordinary life he had lived. Dignitaries from all Europe came to pay their respects, but it was the endless line of rural workers, their families, former students of the school he and Charlotte had maintained, who truly witnessed the legacy he had left. Charlotte lived 6 more years, surrounded by children and grandchildren's love, remaining active in property administration until almost the end. When she finally joined Edward, on a silent spring morning, she was found in her rose garden, a tranquil smile on her face, as if she had simply decided it was time to reunite with her eternal love. The 12 grandchildren they left behind carried forward not only the Montclair name, but lessons of love, perseverance, and dignity that their grandparents had planted like precious seeds in the soil of their souls. Château de Montclair did not die with its lords. Like music that remains in the air even after instruments fall silent, The property continued vibrating with harmonies that Charlotte and Edouard had composed during their intertwined lives. Marie-Claire, now a respectable 50-year-old widow, returned from England with her children to assume guardianship of family traditions. The chateau had become more than a residence. It was a symbol of transformation, living proof that even the most improbable marriages can generate the deepest loves. Charlotte's rose gardens, now tended by Jean-Baptiste's son, bloomed with varieties she had patiently developed over decades. Each rose bush told a story: the white ones she had planted the year of Marie-Claire's birth, the red ones that marked Edouard's recovery, the peach-colored roses that celebrated the twins' birth. The school Charlotte had established had evolved into a formal institution, recognized by the French government as a model of rural education. Generations of peasant children learned not only to read and write, but to dream of futures their parents had never imagined possible. Many became teachers, merchants, even doctors and lawyers, carrying far from the Loire Valley the seeds of hope Charlotte had planted. Marcel had transformed the vineyards into a respected international enterprise. Montclair wines were served in royal palaces and embassies, but he had never forgotten the humility lessons he had learned watching his parents. Each bottle bore the engraved Montclair rose, symbol not only of wine quality, but of the love story that had made everything possible. Dr. Adeline de Montclair had established a Paris clinic, specializing in treating diseases considered incurable. Inspired by her father and mother's miraculous recovery, she dedicated herself to researching innovative treatments for conditions other doctors considered hopeless. Her discoveries about hereditary anemia, based partially on Charlotte's experience, saved hundreds of lives throughout her career. On an autumn afternoon, 50 years after the arranged marriage that had changed everything, Charlotte and Edouard's grandchildren gathered at the chateau for a special celebration. Jean-Philippe, Marie-Claire's eldest son, had become a diplomat like his grandfather. Anne-Sophie, Marcel's daughter, had developed new viticulture techniques that revolutionized French industry. Other relatives' children were scattered throughout Europe, carrying with them values they had learned at family reunions in the chateau. But it was the discovery of a trunk hidden in Isabelle's workshop that brought the most touching revelation of that gathering. Among forgotten paintings and dusty brushes, they found a diary Charlotte had kept secret during all those years, pages that revealed intimate thoughts about the transformation of an arranged marriage into the greatest love of her life. The diary was bound in wine-colored leather, its pages yellowed by time but preserved with loving care. Marie-Claire held it with trembling hands, while her children and nephews gathered in the library, where Charlotte and Edouard had first truly known each other. October 24th, 1881, read Marie-Claire with choked voice. Today I married a stranger. Papa said it's my duty to settle his debts, but my heart feels as if I'm the one being settled, like merchandise in the market. The Count didn't look me in the eyes during the entire ceremony. I wonder if I'll ever find a place in this cold chateau. The following pages revealed the gradual evolution of Charlotte's feelings. Her observations about Edouard were initially clinical. She noted his sadness, respected his pain, admired his dignity before adversity. But gradually the annotations became more intimate, more revealing. December 15th, 1881. I found him crying in Isabelle's room again. My heart broke seeing him thus. It's not envy I feel toward the first wife, it's gratitude that she was loved so deeply. This gives me hope that he's capable of loving again. January 3rd, 1882. He smiled today when he saw children playing in the courtyard. It was only a moment, but it completely transformed his face. I understand now that I'm not competing with a ghost. I'm helping a wounded man rediscover life. The grandchildren took turns reading, discovering through Charlotte's words intimate details of family history they had never known. She wrote about sleepless nights when she watched Edouard sleeping, studying his face for signs that barriers between them were dissolving. May 12th, 1883. Dr. Wagner brought us hope today. Seeing Edouard believe again that he can have a future made me realize I too had stopped believing in my own future. We're healing together, his legs and my heart. But it was the entries about children that most moved the gathered family. August 20th, 1884. Marie-Claire was born at sunset, as if she had waited for the perfect moment to enter our lives. When Edouard held her for the first time, I saw tears in his eyes, but this time they were of pure joy. Our daughter will be living proof that love can be born even where it wasn't expected. The diary's most recent pages revealed Charlotte's profound gratitude for the years she had lived. September 15th, 1920. Edouard departed yesterday during sleep. He held my hand as always. There's no pain in this farewell because I know we lived a complete love. We were blessed not only with years together, but with the opportunity to prove that true love doesn't need to begin with passion. It can begin with respect, grow with companionship, and flourish in devotion. The last entry was dated only a week before Charlotte's death. I'm ready to join him. Our children built extraordinary lives. Our grandchildren will carry forward our story, and the chateau remains as witness that miracles can happen when two people decide to believe in the impossible. May our story inspire others never to give up on love. The most extraordinary revelation emerged from the diary's last section, pages that Marie-Claire initially hesitated to read aloud. It was a detailed account that no family member had suspected existed, the true story behind the arranged marriage. March 10th, 1925, read Marie-Claire, her voice trembling with the magnitude of what she had discovered. Today I receive a letter that will forever change how I see our story. It's from Père Antoine, now very elderly, but who feels the need to confess something before meeting his creator. The priest had revealed in his letter that the marriage between Charlotte and Edouard had not been entirely fortuitous. 2 weeks before the arrangement was finalized, Edouard himself had discreetly sought the parish priest, not to oppose the union, but to investigate the young woman who would be presented to him. Edouard had informed himself about my family, Charlotte had written with handwriting trembling with emotion. Père Antoine confesses that my future husband asked for details about my character, my education, my losses. When he learned I had lost my mother young and lived lonely years, something in his wounded heart recognized suffering similar to his own. The priest's letter continued with an even more surprising revelation. Edouard had secretly settled Charlotte's father's gambling debts a week before the marriage was announced. The matrimonial arrangement had been only a facade to preserve both families' dignity. "He chose me," whispered Charlotte in the yellowed pages. "I wasn't sold as merchandise. I was chosen by a man who recognized in me a soul capable of understanding his pain and perhaps healing it. All this time I believed love had grown by chance, when in truth Edouard had planted its seeds from the first moment." The grandchildren remained in absolute silence, processing the magnitude of this discovery. Their family story, which they already considered extraordinary, revealed itself even more moving, a testament not only to love's power to grow in arid soil, but to the wisdom of a wounded man who had chosen hope over despair. Marie-Claire leafed through the last pages and found something even more precious, a sealed letter addressed, "For our children and the children's children." With trembling hands, she broke the wax seal Charlotte had applied decades before. "If you're reading this," the letter began, "it means you discovered our secret. Edouard confessed the truth to me only on our 20th wedding anniversary. During all those years, I believed he had learned to love me, when in truth he had chosen me from the beginning, because he saw in me the possibility of mutual redemption." The letter continued, "Don't let this revelation diminish our story. True love is no less miraculous for having been intentionally sown. If anything, it makes our journey even more precious, proof that Edouard had wisdom to recognize that love can be cultivated, nurtured, and transformed into something more beautiful than any sudden passion." But the greatest surprise was yet to come, hidden in the envelope along with the letter, a chateau map that would reveal the last secret Charlotte and Edouard had kept for their family. The map was drawn in Edouard's own handwriting, each line traced with meticulous care of a man who had dedicated his life to important details. It showed the chateau and its gardens, but with special markings no family member had noticed before. Following the indications, the grandchildren walked to Charlotte's rose garden, where a centennial rose bush grew solitary in the center of a circle of ancient stones. Jean-Philippe, the tallest of the grandchildren, noticed that one of the stones was slightly displaced. Removing it carefully, they discovered a cavity where rested a cherry-wood box, the same wood as Edouard's special cane. Inside, they found love letters he had written to Charlotte over the years, but had never delivered, considering them too intimate to be shared even with his beloved wife. "My dear Charlotte," read a letter dated 1885, "today marks 4 years since you arrived in my world, like a gentle storm that swept sadness from each room of this chateau. You don't know, but every morning I wake grateful for having had the wisdom to choose you, and every night I fall asleep, marveled that you chose to stay." Another letter from 1900. "Our children grew and became extraordinary, as I always knew they would, having you as mother. But what fills me most with pride is seeing how you transformed not only our family, but this entire region. The schools you founded will educate generations. The vineyards you modernized will feed families for decades. You brought life where there was only existence. The collection's last letter was dated only a week before Edward's death. If you're reading this, it means I departed first, as I always feared would happen. Don't cry for me, my love. I lived more happiness in our 39 years together than many men experience in several lives. You taught me that love isn't a feeling, it's a choice we make every day. I chose you in 1881, and I would choose you again in every life we could have. But there was something more in the box, a legal document that revealed Charlotte and Edward's final act of love. They had secretly established a permanent educational fund, endowed with vineyard income, that would ensure the Chateau School functioned perpetually, offering free education for regional children through all future generations. When the sun set on that day of discoveries, the family remained gathered in the rose garden, each holding one of the unsent love letters. Marie-Claire planted a new rose bush in the circle's center, a special variety that combined characteristics of the white roses Charlotte had cultivated with the red ones Edward had preferred. "This will be the Montclair rose," she announced, "so that all future generations remember that true love isn't found, it's built day after day, choice after choice." While night fell over the Loire Valley, Château de Montclair's windows lit one by one, as they always had since Charlotte had brought life to those ancient walls. In the rooms where first echoed the hesitant steps of a man relearning to walk, in the libraries, where timid whispers transformed into intimate conversations, in the gardens where tears of sadness transformed into tears of joy, Charlotte and Edward's love continued alive. Their chateau had become more than a house. It had transformed into a beacon of hope that proclaimed to the world that the greatest miracles happen not through lightning passions, but through patience, respect, the daily choice to believe that two people can become something greater together than they ever were apart. And thus, while stars emerged in the French sky, the Montclair rose prepared to bloom, carrying in its petals the eternal promise that true love is immortal, passing from heart to heart through generations like a sacred flame that never extinguishes.